Hey there, collectors! Today we're finally getting into our Hiya Godzilla 2014 figure. Finally, Hiya jumps in and gives us a brand new sculpt. You can find this figure on Calcus.com, link down below if you'd like to order it. Let's not waste any more time with the intro. Let's go! Well everybody, let's get straight down to business and start talking about the action figure we're here to review, the Hiya Godzilla 2014 action figure. Now as we know, Hiya has reused the mold several times for the 2019 design. So I gotta say that even though I particularly love that design, I am kind of like looking forward to seeing something new. And this right here, already off the bat, is a fresh breath of air, going back to the beginning of where the Monsterverse began. In the meantime, while we go ahead and wait for that evolved Godzilla, which we were supposed to get late last year, not exactly sure what happened. I'm not going to speculate about release dates, I'm just hoping that we get some sort of notification within the next month or so that possibly it might come on out. But let's go ahead and get into the box art before we talk about this action figure, and eventually we're going to bring the Neca release into view so we can compare the two and see what a decade has done and differences between the companies. So for the box art, there are a few takes I want to go ahead and break down about this box. So I do think, honestly, the picture is really well done. We have a picture of San Francisco in the background, Halo jump, Godzilla in this transparent text slightly, and of course the logos. My big thing that's kind of like questionable is why the coloration? The blue is more in line with Godzilla King of the Monsters as opposed to Godzilla 2014, which more utilized like red and orange. I'm not sure why they didn't do that exactly. It would have fit more with the Muto box art, which we already saw from the Hiya release they did last year, but for some reason they went with blue. It's nothing that's going to be a big turnoff and be like, nah, I'm not going to get the action figure, because definitely I will. It's just one little question that I do kind of wonder, but regardless, it is what it is. For the sides of the box, one side has literally nothing of interest. The opposing side, just the background of the city, and that's literally all it does is just wraps around. And on the very top, it reads Godzilla, with the Halo jump going on, and once again on the very bottom, it's the exact same. However, this time it looks better with the Halo jump going downward, rather than upwards. And the very back is simple and blunt, a giant picture of Godzilla 2014, with the text and all the information that you would expect from an action figure. So now let's get into this brand new mold. So this figure has all kinds of detail that you can just go ahead and just sink your eyes into and just take in every aspect. Let's go ahead and get our up close shots, starting with the side, the body, the neck, face, the tail, the spines, and the legs. Now, I knew when I went ahead and did those in-depth shots, I knew I was going to be sinking in a lot more. It's one of my favorite things to do with these action figures, is get really up close and personal and see the things I don't quite notice at first. I did notice, by the way, this action figure does tend to have some seams right in this area. However, though, it's nothing that I'm going to be extremely critical of because I understand these action figures are going to have cuts and seams. You're going to see it with the articulation. But if you're going to have them to an extent, go ahead and mask them to the best that you can. I think this is actually better than, say, what Neca had done with some of their Godzilla action figures, and overall it isn't an eyesore to look at, nor are any of the cuts in the articulation, which I'll talk about in a moment because this one has some upgrades in contrast to the last Hiya Godzilla 2019 release, which has predominantly been exactly the same since the beginning. Now everybody remembers how in Godzilla 2014 the spines were more reminiscent of mountains rather than the maple leaf spines that we saw for the classic Godzilla. I feel like they found a good sweet spot for these because the spines were always really small. Some people didn't really like the spines for this Godzilla in the movie. For me, I feel like the 2019 spines are more definitive and better. I just love the classic look with a new touch. But this does capture the essence. I think that when the Neca one, should I say, when that one came on out, I felt like they were too small. And we'll go ahead and compare those once we get deeper into this, but right now we're just talking about this action figure individually. Now for the paint apps, there is a lot of different paint apps for this action figure, more than one would expect. Yes, Godzilla 2014 was a really dark movie, and it was hard to tell any details, especially on the Blu-ray transfer. However, for this guy right here, predominantly it kind of has that charcoal color going on, that charcoal black, but when you look around at the body, you see it just fade to like this brown, and it continues all the way up on the neck and just goes through the body, the belly, and the underside, even on the feet as well, you will notice it as well, and just continues all the way down to the tip of the tail, and I think that is really well done. Now, it doesn't just stop there, because if you look at these up-close shots, you also see that it's in the hindquarters of the legs. So it does seem like it is really cool how it is really mixed in there, and it's just not a simple jet black or a simple charcoal black. And of course, let's go ahead and look at the mouth with the reds, and of course, kind of those yellowish teeth that we got going on. And at least for the teeth, by the way, there is some detail. We've got the gums, the eyes. So let's go ahead and talk about this updated articulation. This has been one big drawing point for me for this action figure. Obviously, as one would expect, that the jaw does open and close. Go figure. But the tongue articulation, does it return? And I'm proud to say, yes, it does return. This needs to become a usual staple for these Hiya action figures. I expect it to stick around. I do believe Godzilla 2000 has it as well. For the neck, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 cuts for the neck. The best part is if you notice right here, it has this pliable plastic. Now where this works well for the engineering for this action figure is it helps work around these spines right here. Usually for the Godzilla 2019, that's where the limitations came about. But right here, there are no limitations, and you can really do some bizarre things, but it does help you for getting more range for this action figure. And that's been one of the biggest things I have called Hiya out on the past, is the limitations. So now we're kind of getting beyond that by using different variations of plastic. The lower part of the body also does seem to exhibit this as well. As you can tell, it is kind of pliable as you kind of press on the side, which does give it more range to rock around because the Godzilla 2019 had a literal no range. It just had the cut there. For the arms all the way around, probably, let's see, we are going to push it as much as we can. Yes, it can go there. There's nothing there restricting it. But we're going to go ahead and revert this back to how it goes if it wants to work with me. We do have our bicep articulation, and then for that, we do have our elbow articulation. Pretty smooth. I'm not feeling like this is going to break. Hopefully it doesn't do it on camera. Then for that, we do have our hand or wrist articulation. None of the digits with the fingers move, so it's not that articulate, but that's not something that we see out of Godzilla action figures often. The legs tend to be kind of hindered, but there's really not much more that you really need out of this. At most, this is probably the range that you can get out of it, and then spin all the way around, and this is where it stops. But then again, you're not going to need this Godzilla doing anything crazy, and I feel like this is probably the primary stance of you're going to have your Godzilla in. Now, we do have the double-jointed knees as well, which I'm really surprised that this is here, which, I mean, it's been there for the previous Godzillas, but it has not been implemented into the elbows yet, and that's something I'm looking forward to them doing. And then we have this little weird cut for the feet, and it just basically kind of rocks around, and doesn't really spin. This is probably as far as it goes. And now it's time to talk about the tail of this action figure. Much more innovative than the usual Hiya action figures. In fact, look at this. You can get this into a pose that was not possible for previous releases. The 2019 design was pretty damn simple, and I really like to see there was an engineering step up, and honestly, looking forward, this is how I want to see my Godzilla action figures. You can get it in that nice, wavy type look, wrapping around, and it's nice and smooth. It doesn't fight you as well. You don't have to worry about a bendy wire snapping. So this is now what I consider the bar in terms of tail articulation going forward for Hiya, and we'll see what they do for future designs that come on out. Now this action figure isn't without accessories as well, as we have another set of hands you can go ahead and swap on. I'd advise that you go ahead and warm up the joints of this action figure, just so you avoid breaking the pegs. And here we are. Two different companies attempting to recreate the Godzilla 2014 design 10 years apart. How did they square up together? So let's go ahead and talk about this. A little disclaimer about this NECA release. When this NECA one released, I want to say the price was about $20. So we're talking maybe about $55 to $75, depending on whoever you order this from. And that's not even accounting for the shipping and handling. That's probably like the base price. But for this NECA one, let's go ahead and talk about this one individually. Now, when it released, it was met with some positives, but also its own criticisms. One of the major criticisms was the head, the teeth. Also, looking at it from the front, it seemed a little bit too slender for people's liking. Now, once again, it's important to stress this action figure is over a decade old. Lots of advancements have been made for action figures to capture little details that we couldn't see before, and they have been implemented definitely on the Hiya release. For this action figure, though, I will say that it's still one of my top 5 NECA action figures. And for those that want a little schooling and don't know much about the NECA action figures and let's say you weren't there at the time, this is where it all began and where it started. And honestly, I think that NECA did a fantastic job. So let's compare various aspects of both action figures up close and personal so you can see what jumps have been made and how the different companies have engineered their action figures. So as we go ahead and step through these photos together, I want to go ahead and state this. It's not my intent to go ahead and gatekeep one company versus the other, no. But what I do think is interesting is to see the differences in the approach and the execution between both Godzilla figures, even though they are done of the same design. And looking at them side by side, one thing I do want to go ahead and state too, is it does seem like the NECA release tried to implement some color variation. However, though, it's really just hard to notice if your lighting is really dark in your room. But it is there. It's not definitely as transparent as what you see on the Hiya release. Now, it's important to note that NECA did go ahead and favor the bendy wire. And this bendy wire is pretty damn useless. I cannot get very much range. Like, you really got to push at this. In fact, I feel like if I push it at too much, it's going to break. So, I mean, there are a few different cuts, and I do remember when this action figure was released, you had to actually put this tail on, like so. But I personally believe Godzilla action figures excel when you segment the tail on out. This is the way to go. And NECA did go ahead and implement this later on for their future releases, but it's something that unfortunately they never got to go much further than what they did for the Godzilla 1989, and I want to say the Godzilla 2003 design, which was one of their final releases they had done. Now, to finish this off before we go ahead and do a recap, let's talk about the size difference between various different Godzilla action figures starting now. SH Monster Arts Godzilla Evolved. Hiya GVK Skullcrawler. SH Monster Arts Destroyer. SH Monster Arts Gigan. The Hiya Female Muto. And, last but not least, one of the most important ones, Hiya Godzilla 2019. As you can tell, there is a significant size difference between the two figures. And that is important to note because there obviously was a big growth difference between Godzilla 2014 design and the 2019 in the movie's lore. So speaking on the final verdict, I do believe in terms of articulation this was one of the biggest step-ups for this action figure. I got mine on Calcus.com, it runs for about $75, that is about base price. So go ahead and check the link down below and go ahead and give it an order if you haven't got your hands on this bad boy. Let me know what you think of this action figure. Are you going to go ahead and get it or not? To me, it is definitely one of my favorites that has been done outside of the 2019 release, and I've been thrilled to get a Godzilla that is not a 2019 sculpt, as we've seen so many. 4 of those bad boys is enough for me, outside, I guess, the LED one that's coming on out. But for this right here, this is the first of the Godzilla 2014, and I possibly could see a few different variants or repaints. Maybe one with, like, blue spines lighting on up, or maybe with the severed female Muto's head, something like that. We'll see what happens and what the future brings us, but we know there is plenty in store. So I'll catch you guys around. Thanks for checking in. Like, subscribe. Catch you later.